What's worse than one monster? Fighting a monster that multiplies when you hit it. Hercules shows up for round 2, and surprise, every problem literally grows 2 new heads. Hercules shows up to cut off heads and ends up playing the world's worst game of whack-a-mole. So, Hercules had strangled a lion, worn its hide like an oversized Halloween costume, and terrified his boss into hiding in a jar. Not a bad start to his redemption program. But the thing about impossible tasks is, there's always another one waiting. Eurystheus predictably wasn't impressed. Instead of congratulating Hercules, he decided it was time to make the chores harder, meaner, and even less reasonable. Which brings us to labor number 2, the Hydra of Lerna. Now, if the lion was basically an angry cat with armor, the Hydra was an angry snake with the worst design flaw imaginable. Or maybe it was a design feature, depending on how you look at it. This was a serpent-like monster that lived in the swamps of Lerna, a place already unpleasant enough without a giant reptile lurking around. It had multiple heads. Accounts vary, because myths are never consistent, but the numbers range anywhere from 8 to 50, depending on which ancient storyteller wanted to be the most dramatic. The popular choice is 9. 9 heads, each with snapping fangs, and a nasty little trick. If you cut one off, 2 more grew in its place. It was the mythological version of a reply-all email catastrophe. And as if that wasn't enough, one of those heads was said to be immortal. That's right, uncuttable, indestructible, not going anywhere. So you could slash and burn for hours, and still end up with this one smug snakehead glaring at you. Just imagine trying to weed your garden and discovering that every dandelion you pull out spawns 2 more, and one of them is rooted in concrete. That's the Hydra in a nutshell. Eurystheus, of course, thought this was the perfect job for Hercules. "Go kill that thing," he said, probably while sipping wine and trying not to laugh. Hera once again was thrilled. She had raised the Hydra herself in some versions of the myth just to make Hercules' life harder. Because when you are the queen of gods with nothing better to do, you apparently start breeding swamp snakes as a hobby. So, Hercules sets out. Lion skin wrapped around him, club in hand, bow slung over his shoulder. And by now, he knows this isn't going to be easy. The lion had been tough, but at least there was only one of it. Now he was walking into a swamp, dealing with multiple heads, poison breath, and a landscape designed to trip you at every step. The swamp of Lerna wasn't just soggy ground. It was believed to be an entrance to the underworld. So this whole fight was basically staged at the edge of death itself, with the smell of decay and stagnant water all around. Not exactly the ideal work environment. When Hercules found the Hydra's lair, he did the obvious thing. He shot an arrow into it. Not to kill it, because he knew by now that arrows never worked on these creatures. It was more of a doorbell. The Hydra came slithering out, heads snapping, hissing, dripping venom. And here, if this were a normal action story, we'd get a fast-paced battle scene. But since this is bedtime history, we'll slow it down. Picture Hercules swinging his club, smashing one head then another, only to watch as new ones sprouted instantly. Chop, sprout, chop, sprout. It must have been exhausting, like trying to swat mosquitoes that doubled every time you hit them. At one point, the battle got so overwhelming that Hercules realized he couldn't do it alone. So he called on his nephew, Iolaus, who had tagged along for this labor. Now, Iolaus isn't usually remembered in the Hercules story. Sidekicks rarely are, but in this case, he was the brains of the operation. While Hercules fought, Iolaus came up with a clever idea. Each time a head was cut off, he took a burning torch and cauterized the neck. That way, no new heads could grow back. Teamwork at its finest. Hercules cut, Iolaus burned, cut, burn, cut, burn. Slowly, methodically, the monster's many heads stopped multiplying. It was grim, smelly work and probably very smoky, but it worked. Eventually, Hercules reached the immortal head, the one that couldn't be cut off, couldn't be burned away. So he did the next best thing. he chopped it off anyway, stuffed it under a massive rock and buried it deep in the swamp. That way it couldn't cause any more trouble. Out of sight, out of mind. A very practical solution, and honestly, a very human one. How many of us just shoved the unsolvable problem under something heavy and pretended it's dealt with? Hercules did exactly that. The immortal head still existed, still hissed in the dark, but it was trapped forever under that stone. With the Hydra dead, Hercules, ever resourceful, saw an opportunity. He decided to dip his arrows in the Hydra's blood. This was no ordinary blood. It was toxic, corrosive, the kind of venom that could kill instantly. By soaking his arrows in it, Hercules gave himself the deadliest weapons in the ancient world. From that point on, every arrow he carried was a lethal one-shot tool, and many of his later exploits depended on this grisly upgrade. It is a reminder that Hercules didn't just fight and move on. He learned from each labor, took something away, and used it in the next. Now, here's where things get messy. Eurystheus, the king in the jar, later declared that this labor didn't actually count. Why? Because Hercules had accepted help from Iolaus. In the king's mind, the labors were supposed to be solo jobs, no assistance allowed. So, he docked Hercules 1 credit. 12 labors, -1. Which, if you're keeping score at home, meant Hercules ended up having to do 14 tasks in total. Because apparently, if you're trying to atone for murder and cleanse your soul, you still have to follow workplace policy. Nothing says divine justice like technicalities. You can imagine how frustrating this must have been for Hercules. He wrestled a mutant snake swamp monster with multiple heads and poisoned breath, and the response he got was basically, "Hey, doesn't count, you had help." That's Eurystheus for you. Always moving the goalposts, always looking for loopholes to make Hercules' life more miserable. But that was part of the punishment. It wasn't supposed to be fair. It was supposed to grind him down, body and spirit, until there was nothing left. Hera wanted him broken. Eurystheus wanted him humiliated. And yet, here he was, still standing, with a quiver full of poisoned arrows and a lion-skinned cloak that scared the neighbors. If the Nemean lion had been about brute strength, the Hydra was about persistence and adaptation. You couldn't just smash your way through it. You needed strategy, you needed backup, and you needed the patience to keep cutting and burning until the job was done. In a way, the Hydra is one of the most relatable of Hercules' labors. Because haven't we all had a Hydra or two? The kind of problem where the harder you fight it, the more it multiplies. Where every solution just spawns 2 new headaches. Hercules' trick was to stop trying to do it alone, to lean on help, however begrudgingly, and that's why he won. After the battle, when the swamp was quiet again and the Hydra's carcass lay twisted among the reeds, Hercules must have been exhausted, covered in slime, smelling of smoke and venom, and already knowing Eurystheus would probably find some way to downplay it. But still, he had survived. He had killed another impossible creature, and in the process, he had armed himself with weapons that would make the rest of his journey just a little less impossible. Of course, Hera was furious. Her pet project, her carefully raised monster gone in an evening of fire and sweat. She must have looked down from Olympus fuming, while Hercules walked away with new poisoned arrows and another notch in his belt. Her hatred only deepened, and if there's one thing we know about Hera, it's that she never lets go of a grudge, which meant the labors ahead were only going to get more difficult, more humiliating, and more cruel. But for now, Hercules had faced the Hydra. The swamp was still, the immortal head buried under its rock, the air thick with the smell of burned flesh. And somewhere, Eurystheus was scribbling notes about technical disqualifications, preparing his next assignment with that petty little smirk. Hercules didn't know what was coming yet. But we do. And if you thought a lion and a snake were bad, just wait until you hear about cleaning someone's stables. Because nothing says heroism quite like shoveling endless piles of divine manure. But that's for another night. For now, we leave Hercules in the fading swamp light, weary but unbroken, trudging back down the road with his nephew by his side and his arrows dripping venom. 2 labors attempted, 1 officially dismissed, and the long, long list still stretching ahead of him.